David, welcome to the December 26th podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
Good. I must say, you might have the brightest smile of any guest who's ever been on this show.
Well, I'm happy to do things, and you're helping me do those things, and I appreciate that very much.
I appreciate that the excitement is coming through and the enthusiasm. I can feel it.
Great.
So let's go.
Shoot.
Tell me, who is David Adams?
All right, so I've been thinking about this. And David Adams is a guy who thinks that we can do better. I think when we look at our communities, when we look at our families, when we look at our country, I keep saying to myself, we can do better. And I don't always know what that better is or how to get there. But I believe in many of the things that we do when we see that this is not good enough. And I'm the kind of guy who wants to make things better. And so that's who I am. That's what I do. I make things better, whether it's through education, whether it's through a service in terms of military, or trying to be the best at it I can be.
Awesome. So I want to unpack all of those things.
Shoot.
But let's talk first at how you got there. How did you get to the point where you said things can be better and I want to be a part of that process or that journey?
I think when you start to understand how and where we've come from, and you see people who have looked at the world around them, and who said that I'm not going to invest for me right now, right? I'm going to invest for the next generation or the generation after that. I think a lot about Maya Angelou's poem. She says, using the gifts that my ancestors made, I am the dreams and the hopes of the slave, right? And that says to me that even though things are good or not so good, that we're living the best kind of life that people dreamed of, right? That people went to bed thinking that one day I'm going to be that guy.
Right.
And then they try to invest in their communities and in their friends and their circumstances so that could happen. Think about Harriet Tubman, who escaped slavery, right, and went back again and again and again and make sure that people came after her, right? And they would have tortured her. They would have done unspeakable things to her. But it wasn't good enough for her that she got out, right? It was that she had to take people with her. So I think these are the things that kind of have shaped and inspired me. People have spent a lot of time reaching out to me and giving me an opportunity to be successful. And so I hope that my goal or my contribution in life is being able to reach out and give other people that same opportunity and open their eyes with regards to saying, however things are going, we can make them better.
Awesome. So do you feel like, from your personal story, your childhood and your upbringing, those people were instrumental in helping you see that there was a better way or there was more out there? What is your personal story? How does that play into this?
Well, I like to think that I'm a person of institutions. I have institutions that shape me, my family, the military, camp. These places have taught me to think beyond myself. Church, obviously, my mom would be crestfallen if I did not mention my church.
Gotta mention
right?
Church gets so much shine on this podcast.
All right. Sunday school, Mr. Hart. So yeah, I think places like that taught me that what you give beyond yourself is a true kind of measure of a man or of a character. So I think when you're moving through those spaces and you see how people are able to overcome their own situations, and always look around them and say, here's $5 to a person who needs it. Here's some way that I can contribute to something that's bigger than myself, to the whole. And I think when people find that purpose and recognize that the whole is where we need to be, that by investing in the whole, we're really investing in ourselves, then there's always something to change, right?
Absolutely.
There's always something to make better. And I think when you realize that people spent their lives investing in you, even though they didn't know you, right? Even though they never seen you, they gave their lives for you, so that someone like you could be better than they were. Then I feel like you're motivated to do something for the future generations too.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect segue into the work that you do professionally outside of your military service, which we'll talk about as well, but you are impacting the future generation. What is your current position in your career?
Sure, so I serve as the Director for Social and Emotional Learning at the Urban Assembly. We are a network of 22 public schools in New York City. And in that role, I serve as a head of a team of 4 who are dedicated to teaching students the skills that they need to relate to themselves and relate to others, as well as see themselves as part of a community, make good decisions, and solve problems.
Now, how did you get here? Because I'm sure it's not something that you start college and you're like, I'm going to get into social emotional learning. Or maybe it is. I don't know. But like, how did you get into this role? What led to this point?
Well, incidentally, I did start college, and I was inspired by a professor, Professor Dr. Maurice Elias, who spent his career thinking about the role of psychology in education. So I've always been interested in the educational gap. And I wasn't convinced that the educational gap was because black kids or brown kids were not as smart as everybody else. But I do believe that there are certain types of things that help us achieve. And these things are not always kind of the X's and the O's and the A's and the B's. These are the things that we need to think about in terms of how we make decisions. What are the kinds of ways that we solve problems? And how do we be resilient against some of the challenges that a lot of our black and brown kids are facing?
Right.
Right. And so I've been really interested in thinking about resilience through college and through my career. And it turns out that social and emotional development is a big part of resilience. Being able to maintain and develop good relationships is part of what makes people effective. And so when you look at communities, it turns out that resilience as a community tends to be focused on how people are relating to each other as well. So things like social cohesion, family structure, all those things are a really good indicator of whether or not people will be socially mobile. So for me, I had an opportunity to sit in a class for Dr. Elias. He talked a lot about what resilience is, how we can develop resilience in our youth, and how the education system can play a part in ensuring that our students graduate with the ability to be successful. So from there, I had an opportunity to work in his lab, and then I worked at a place called the Center for Social and Emotional Development and Education. We focus on school climate and culture. From there, I spent about a year working at the Health, Emotion, and Behavior Laboratory, which is at Yale University. They sent me off to England, and I was evaluating social emotional learning programming, as well as helping support implementation. Then I came back to New York City, where I was focused on students with emotional disturbance, classified as emotionally disturbed, I should say, in our District 75. One of the things that I think is interesting about that classification is that it's the most male of any classification. It's the most African American of any classification. And it's the most related to circumstance. So more likely to have a single parent family, more likely to come out of poverty, and more likely to have challenges in terms of home life. So these are a group of kids in our city who are just like every other group of kids in our city, but who have been classified because of their behavior. So I've been really interested in thinking about how we focus less on what's wrong with those kids and build on what's right with those kids. So social emotional learning was an opportunity for us to work with these students and think about how we develop the types of skills that they need to be mainstreamed, so they get out of special education and be successful. And from there, I wanted to think more about how we get into general education, rather than focusing on kids who are already in special education and thinking about how do we get them out. How do we work with our general education schools so that our kids can stay there. That led me to the Urban Assembly, where I've been for about 5 years.
So what does your day-to-day look like now with all of that experience, and now you're in a position that is squarely within this area, wholly focused on social emotional learning? How does that play out in being a director of a team on a day-to-day basis?
Well, it's a lot of communication. It's a lot about wanting to make sure that people value this as much as they value academics. So a lot of the work that we do is working to shift the system, whether that's policy in terms of working with Albany and shifting their thoughts, moving from kind of voluntary guidelines or voluntary standards to mandatory standards in terms of social emotional development. That's working with partners like Hunter College, Fordham University in terms of training teachers, training social workers to believe the importance of social emotional learning. So you don't have to kind of fight a rearguard action where you have to tell teachers who have all this stuff on their plate already that this is another thing. And then it's about writing, making sure that people have an opportunity to understand the work that we're doing through writing, making sure students' voices are heard, teachers' voices are heard, principals' voices and stories are told. Beyond that, it's working in the schools themselves and working with our schools to implement social emotional learning, integrate it, and then evaluate it so that our kids have an opportunity, for example, to think about their own personal responsibility or their own decision making so they can set and achieve goals around that.
Sure. So within the urban assembly construct, it sounds as though social emotional learning is just integrated into the curriculum as opposed to being a remediation method,
Right.
which sounds like the case in some other school districts. So is every student getting the benefit of this teaching?
Every student is getting the benefit of this teaching, right? So we all can improve on our ability to make decisions, right? We all
Right.
can improve on our self-awareness or our self-management. We shouldn't have to wait for a student to get so behind in these skills than to say, well, let's make this a better thing in terms of remediation. We believe that every student should have access to post-secondary success, right? The Urban Assembly is founded on this idea of social and economic mobility. In order to do that, we need to make sure that our students have stable relationships and post-secondary access, right? So when we think about every student, it means that every student has the same language. Every student interacts in a way that reflects the types of ideas that we've developed with them. Every student has an opportunity to reflect on their own strengths and challenges and set goals so that when they leave our schools, they can develop effective relationships. They have the social skills that they need to be successful. They can read the social norms in a room and then conduct themselves in a way that's going to meet their goals. So I appreciate your point there. It's not about waiting for a student to fail and then saying, this is what's wrong with you. It's about giving every opportunity to every student so that they can develop themselves to be successful.
Right, and you hear like all these stories I know in other school districts where I'm from or people that I know personally where children have issues that have presented themselves and things that need to be dealt with. And then at that point, they're on this individualized learning plan.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I forget what it's called.
IEP.
IEP, yes.
Yeah.
So they're on that at that point, but they're not given the tools just because they're in school, like in the way that you're talking about. And I think you brought up something really important when you said that often the kids that have been classified as emotionally disturbed are experiencing certain things in the home or living in poverty. And my first thought was, what about all those kids who may not be manifesting the signs yet, right? So there's nothing to classify because they're essentially functioning in the way that they're supposed to at this stage. But what happens when that manifests later? Or they get out into adulthood and they don't have the necessary tools, which is why I find the urban assembly model so fascinating. I mean, you have kids who are being equipped now for skills that they will take into relationships, professional settings, advanced academia, etc., which is going to help them thrive in a way that unfortunately some of their counterparts in other school districts may not. So with that being said, you had mentioned this idea of social cohesion and all those things. When people are coming from communities where they experience trauma or poverty or certain social constructs and are not equipped in this way, how does that affect them into adulthood? What are the lasting effects there?
Well, I think this speaks a lot to the research is called around ACEs. And it's focused on what goes wrong when students are exposed to high levels of stress and toxic stress. There's a lot of research now that's talking about what the impact of that along students or a child's developmental spectrum is. So I think, the challenge here is that when people are exposed to stress and they don't have a context of loving relationships and supportive relationships, that stress has an impact on their brain, right? It makes them more likely to see threat where threat doesn't appear. There's a threat awareness kind of research strand that talks about looking at neutral faces, and kids who have been exposed to a lot of stress tend to see anger, aggression in transparently neutral faces.
Okay.
So if you took a kid who's been very stressed throughout their life in terms of not having responsive parenting, having difficult kind of circumstances, and showed them a face, and took a student took a child who has been more supported, that child is more likely to see a completely neutral face as something that's threatening them.
Wow.
So a lot of these things kind of create opportunities for kids to react in things much quicker, with much less thought than they would have if they were exposed to less stressful environments, or who are exposed to stressful environments without supportive relationships. Right. One of the things that you see about resilience, it's not just an individual kind of trait. So when you're looking at parenting, for example, kids who are raised in really stressful environments but with really responsive parenting tend to do okay, or tend to have less impact, or less impacted by that stress than kids without that responsive parenting. When we say responsive, we just mean parents who listen to their kids, parents who tend to use discipline methods that are focused on teaching the kids what right looks like versus punishing them for what wrong looks like. So these are kinds of things that kids who are exposed to difficulty and trauma-informed kind of context can still be successful in their lives. But to your question, it's a long-term impact that when kids are exposed to these pieces, they're less likely to be successful. And you used a word here, thrive. They're less likely to thrive. And what we care about, what I care about, is not just getting kids to baseline. I care about thriving.
Right.
I care about every kid being the best kid that they can be, meaning the most potential that they can have. So when we think about the Urban Assembly, we think about what are the conditions that we need in our schools so that every kid can thrive, even if they're coming from difficult backgrounds. And one of those conditions is teaching them about social and emotional skill sets.
Wow. So I want to talk a little bit more about responsive parenting.
Sure.
Because especially for many of us who've grown up in communities of color, there's a certain culture around how children are raised.
Yeah.
And it is about what you did wrong.
Yeah.
And you will be punished for what you've done wrong.
Sure.
And children are seen and not heard.
Yeah.
No, you can't express what you're feeling. I'm talking, just listen when I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
And you don't have a chance to respond. And if you do, you are being disrespectful.
Yeah.
So do you think there's a need for education within the home and within the family dynamic, especially within the Black family dynamic, to sort of introduce some of what you're talking about in the home environment as well, in tandem with what's going on in school?
So there's a concept here of good enough parenting, right? That most parents, are really, really worried about messing their kid up for life.
Right.
And in fact, most parents are good enough, unless you're cracking your kid over the head every day, with a spatula. Most parents are good enough to raise kids in a way that they're going to be successful. It becomes more complicated as the stress levels increase, right? So as you get into higher and higher levels of stress, the quality of your parenting tends to be more important in terms of those kids' outcomes. So if you're in a middle class neighborhood and you don't have a lot of issues in your life, most parenting is going to be good enough. So I think when we're thinking about our high needs kids in our high needs neighborhoods, they need to be exposed to high quality parenting. And most parents are doing the best they can, right? So when a parent slaps or beats their kid or slaps them, they're trying to show them what the right thing is, right? They're doing that because they're trying to show them what right looks like. And I think the hard part of this is trying to work with parents or working with parents to be more proactive in terms of how they're relating to their kids. And there's simple things you can do, right? How do you establish expectations in your home? And do that before your child makes a mistake, right? So this is how we work with the oven. This is how we work with the toilet. This is how we work with these different things. How do we establish routines in the home so that kids are confident in what they should be doing? And can move from a transition from one thing to another effectively, right? And then how can we identify what is the disconnect between what the student or what the child expects, what we expect, and what the child did? So when we see a child act out, we always think about it as a mismatch between what our expectations are and those child's actions.
Right.
So when we talk about, hey, what was my expectation? Why was my expectation this? And how did you do this? Then the consequence is fine. You can put them in timeout, you can take away their toys, you can say whatever you want to do. But if you really want to change that behavior, right, you need to understand why did the child do that? What was that mismatch in terms of what the understanding was and what the child did? And then what can I do to help that child be more successful in the future? So I think most of our parents are doing what they know how to do. The challenge is when you're using physical violence in terms of with your kids. The risk is that as kids' behavior becomes more complicated, parents tend to say, well, I'm going to use more and more of the thing that I already know.
Exactly.
Right? So I'm going to start with a snap, right? Well, that didn't work. Well, I'm going to start with a smack. Okay, well, that didn't work. And then you just keep going up the length because you're using this theory of action that says, if this doesn't work, then I'm going to increase the intensity. And that's where you get into that situation where, our kids who are already in those high stress situations are now being exposed to a large amount of stress because the discipline methods that are being used are not effective in terms of working with them, and meeting them where they are.
Absolutely. And I think too, sometimes from a cultural standpoint, it's this concept of if I don't show you here
Yeah.
consequences, you're going to get them out in the world,
Yeah.
and you're going to end up in juvie or jail or
Yeah.
prison or what have you. And I wholeheartedly believe in like slave syndrome, post-traumatic slave, all that stuff,
Yeah.
and how it's just been passed down from generation to generation,
Yeah.
which is why I'm so excited about the work that Urban Assembly is doing. But it also makes me a little sad that this is not widespread. Are you optimistic that this sort of cohesive approach to educating children, it can happen in our public school system and be something that's commonplace and not necessarily something that's just in this coalition of schools?
Well, so I came on and we talked about we can do better, right? And within Urban Assembly, we can do better. Within our New York City school system, we can do better within New York State and within our country. And my job is to help us get to that better place. So I am optimistic because I am leading that charge, and I want to make sure that every school in this country has an opportunity to teach these skills. Every student has an opportunity to learn these skills. Every parent has an opportunity to work with their kids around these skills. And then we'll see how people treat each other. We'll see how people resolve problems and disagreements. We'll see how people make decisions around, whether or not to drink and drive or whether or not to go with that person. These are the kinds of things that I think are important not only for our schools, for our lives. When we talk to our kids and I ask them, when do you use these skills? They most often say with my brother, right? Or my sister. They're like, I was trying to resolve this disagreement. I remembered, how to express my feelings more effectively. So there are people who think this is about touchy-feely things. This is about, I don't want to be hard. I just want to, and to me, it's not about that. To me, it's about life and death. It's about having people make good decisions when they're under stress, when they're not under stress, having parents, working with parents to raise their kids in a way that they're going to be successful. So that poverty doesn't define us. Right. So that the challenges that we face are not the things that are the only thing that people understand about us. There's a lot of people who've been successful, who've come through difficult circumstances, and we're trying to replicate that for our kids.
And what ages are the kids that you're working with?
We work with middle schools to high schools. So I want to say 12 to 18.
Okay. So if someone is listening to this and they have, say, a 16-year-old who they've been having behavioral challenges with or some issues with, and they say, this is something that I want to expose my teenager to, is it ever too late in the developmental process to introduce social emotional learning?
You ask such great questions. It's never too late. The most important thing that I would say is that what we do is a lot more important than what we say.
Okay.
Right. So going back to our conversation a little bit about parents, one of the big challenges that parents have, for example, is that they want to, curse up a storm around their kids and then smack their kids when they hear their kids cursing and saying, "Don't do that." Right. Your child is going to respond to what they see. Right. And so it's never too late to demonstrate or develop the social emotional skills. As kids get older, it becomes more important to model it rather than tell it, right? You can tell a 5-year-old, how to resolve a conflict. A 16-year-old is just going to watch how you deal with your spouse, right? And be like, I'm going to do that or not. So I think as we get older, we need to be thinking about how we model these things and make sure there's consistency between what we say and what we do.
Awesome. So since you mentioned a spouse, I'm going to shift gears a little bit.
Shoot.
Because one of the recurring themes in my own conversations with friends and people that I know and just in the media is around Black love and relationships and some of the dysfunction there. And can Black men make it work with Black women? We're all coming in with all of our baggage and trying to build something. Do you think the lack of social emotional learning has played into the dynamics in Black relationships?
I think Black relationships have a challenge in terms of how many men are available to women.
Valid.
I think that the education level of women, as compared to the education level of men, creates a pool by which there's a lot of competition for men. And I think when you create a pool of competition for women over men, then behaviors start to be linked to that competition. So the stock of men go up, the stock of women go down. So I think when we think about values, values are sometimes shaped by the circumstance and the situation. And I think what we see in our Black community is that we have a circumstance where Black women are out earning Black men.
Yes.
And there's not enough Black men anyway, in terms of people who are in the pool of employable men who are making a living. That makes it so that there's a lot of options for black men. As you probably know, black men tend to have a higher interracial dating
Yes.
than black women. So when you're looking at just the pool, I think it puts a lot of pressure. And I think this comes back to the concept of values. What type of values that we have and how we're living out those values. So I think every relationship benefits from people who can communicate their needs and wants. Every relationship benefits when people are able to manage themselves effectively, take responsibility, and make decisions. I think with regards to our relationships in our community, I'd like to see us be more willing to communicate. I'd like to see us be more willing to take responsibility in terms of what people are bringing to the table. And I think as we increase the responsibility of our men, and push them to greater responsibility, then we'll see that they're better partners. I think that black women are great partners. I think that they are what drives our community. It keeps our community together, keeps our churches together, keeps our politics together. And I think if we could just come to a place where black women and black men are looking at each other for what they're both bringing, rather than kind of a view that's more idealized, then I think our relationships will be stronger. But certainly the impact of single parents in our community has an impact on the social and emotional development of our kids. When you look at boys versus girls, for example, boys tend to be a lot more sensitive to single parenthood than girls in terms of their behavior. And family dysfunction tends to impact boys to a greater rate, and it shows up in behavior. Same thing with poverty, right? So boys tend to be more sensitive to living in higher levels of poverty than girls. And then again, the impact of that shows up in behavior. So boys, I think, in general, tend to be more sensitive to dysfunction. And it shows up in the types of juvenile kind of justice-linked activities, behavioral activities, that I think should give us pause when we think about what we're trying to do with our families, right? So I think when we think about our families and why we have our families and what we're trying to accomplish, I think we need to think beyond our individual needs and think about the whole, back to the conversation we had before.
And I find it interesting that you said pushing black men into greater responsibility. Ironically, there's been a clip that's been circulating the last few days. John Gray, the famous pastor, who was on a talk show or something with women hosts.
Yeah.
And this clip has now gone viral because he spoke to, and I'm paraphrasing, how his wife essentially had to grow him up in a way. And he said he married someone who was 2 sizes too big, and he had to grow into the marriage. And he was praising her, in a sense, for being a covering and pushing him into greater. However, it has drawn a lot of ire, a lot of backlash online, especially amongst Black Twitter, because it's shining a light on this concept that black women always have to do the work. And they have to grow men up, and people want a mother and not a spouse. And we were talking about it here, the crew and I, this morning to get an opinion, what people thought. And I mean, I come from this school of thought that I don't want to raise anyone, but that's his marriage, and that worked for him. Do you think that sometimes the onus is placed on black women unfairly, like too much responsibility is placed on us to help a black man become all that he can become?
Yes, I do. But I also think that that's what it takes to be successful. I don't think it's just black women. I think our black community has to raise up our men. I think, like, when you look at, for example, the difference between how boys are in school and girls are in school, right? You'll see about a 15% graduation gap, right, in terms of boys and girls, right? Boys and girls are not the same. They don't act the same. And girls tend to have a greater propensity towards responsibility at younger ages than guys do, right? And so when I say that, I mean that in my experience, men will meet the expectations that are put upon them.
Okay.
And so when we raise the expectations and say, hey, it's your responsibility to do these things, then men will meet those expectations. Is it fair that people have to do that? I feel like it's a question of, is it fair that there are a lot of black men in prison? No, but that's the case, so what are we going to do about it, right? So to me, what can we do to make this better? My unit of analysis is not necessarily black men or black women, it's a black family.
Okay.
Right? And so when I say, what are we doing with our black family, then it becomes, what is the outcome here? Is it fair on one person versus the other person? Maybe or maybe not. But if our outcome is stable families that allow our kids to be successful, then that to me is worth the fairness or unfairness of the situation.
Okay. And you are married with children?
I am. Yes, 8 years.
8 years, congratulations. I mean, because this day and age, if you can make it past the 7-year itch, it is commendable.
Is that so?
Yes.
Bang.
So how has or has your professional experience and your training informed the way you've approached marriage and family?
So, I care a lot about expectations. I care a lot about when my wife and I were on our honeymoon, I set up an opportunity for us, which she didn't appreciate. And it was like would you rather stay home or would you rather that I work, right? And there were like these kind of series of forced choices things. Like I could stay home and take care of the kids, or you can make all the money. Like, what would you prefer? She was like,
so it's an all or nothing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because when you do all or nothing, you get what people's actual preferences are. If you let them go in the middle, then they're always like, well, sort of. But she preferred that I would work and she would stay home. That's not what she does. We both work, right? But then when I have to work very hard and I'm not home and then I can't be as good of a husband or be as good of a father as I want to be, it's because I'm holding down that side of the house, right? And that's how she would prefer it, right? She would not prefer it the other way around. So for me, I just think that the things that I learn about how we communicate, how we set expectations, how we work through differences, how we express ourselves has helped to just work through conflict, to set up expectations so we're not living in an idealized world, right? We're living in the real world where there's real mortgages to be paid and real car notes to be taken care of, real kids to be put up in terms of put in bed at night. And I think that helps us to work through conflict and difficulty. With my kids, as my wife, as my partner, she's been great in working together in terms of setting up schedules. We have a bedtime routine. Our kids have 3 values in our home: respect, responsibility, and resilience. And they manage to think through those different things. Like respect is please and thank you. Respect is listening to the first time. Responsibility is cleaning up after yourselves. And so we spend a lot of time reinforcing those things with like lollipops and things like that.
And how old are they?
6 and 7.
Wow.
5 and 6.
So they're learning about resilience already.
Yeah.
5 and 6. We'll go with that.
Yes.
I think that's the right age.
It changes every year, and it's taken me off guard.
That's what happens as they get older, year after year.
Yeah. But yeah, no, they learn about resilience. They learn about calming down, when they're upset. They learn about being respectful even though you're angry. They learn about, in terms of resilience, giving it all you got, right? We use that as another thing, working your hardest. So we use those things to frame, going back to the conversation before, when we have to correct our kids. Was that really respectful? Well, they understand what respect looks like, so they can identify the gap between what they did and what our expectations are. Was that really resilient? Especially when terrible twos come in and they're screaming, blah. Just working with them, breathing, calming down. The difference between how you feel and how you act. I can feel upset, I can feel angry, but I have to be respectful, right? And that's a big deal for people, and it's particularly for our kids, right? You can feel however you want, and that's okay, but you still need to be and show respect to your mother and to your father and to your family.
So it sounds like you've found a way to effectively parent without physical harm.
We try.
You try,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we care about it. Care about teaching our kids what they need to do and what they need to be. So we don't really focus on physical discipline in our home. The root word of discipline is disciple, and that means to teach, right? So when I think about how we shift and teach our kids what they need to know to be successful, that's my job. My job is to produce kids who can go out in the world and be successful. I'm not doing my job if they don't know right from wrong, or if they think that the only way to solve problems is using their hands. Right, so we talk about how can we solve this problem, whether it's ice cream that fell on the ground or homework. Like, how can we solve this problem, right? Or the brother still took something. So the extent that I think that we focus on solving problems, and using our minds and our words, I think that my kids are going to be prepared to go out in the world and solve the same kind of problems that they have to solve at their house.
That's awesome. And you are in the military as
Yes.
well. What branch of the military do you serve?
I am an Army engineering officer.
How long?
I've been in the reserve for 17 years.
17 years.
Yes.
Wow. So I would dare to say most of your adult life.
Yeah. I would dare to agree.
You got a baby face. So, so what role? You said you are
I'm an engineer officer.
Engineer officer.
Yeah,
so I remember the first time that we spoke, you had been up.
Yeah, I was down
before.
in South Carolina. I run a basic training company for drill sergeants. So essentially, our job is to socialize civilians into soldiers through basic training.
Okay.
So that's where I was when we were talking. I was running with its trainees.
So when we think of military, we think of rigid, right? Literally militaristic. Like it's all about schedules and being regimented.
Yeah.
There is no room for emotion in it. But have you been able to utilize some of the skills that you have
Absolutely.
in your day job, for lack of a better term, in your military service and training these recruits?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, I mean, look, the military is all about cooperation, right? It's just a big team. The best teams are the teams that work the best with each other and who have roles that people are comfortable with, right? And how do you work together? You got to communicate, right? So here's an example of how we do that in the Army. Let's say we have a long movement and people aren't getting along. If it's 5 miles, we give them really heavy stuff. We give 20 people, a fake dummy for 160 pounds and say, you got to move it 5 miles. There's only two options, right? You can communicate and figure it out and everybody can take turns carrying it, or you can yell at each other for 5 miles. Well, there's people who take responsibility, do most of the work. So the military sets up situations to teach people how to work together. And people who have the skills are more able to maximize those situations. And people who struggle with them learn them through our corrective action, where you're looking at it and you're saying that platoon moved this dummy, 10 miles, you moved it 25 feet, right? Why? Right? Well, because everybody was arguing the whole time, or because somebody in the back didn't want to carry the dummy. And that's going to fail. It's going to give you a fail. It's going to give you a fail on a mission and training. It's going to give you a fail in real life. So to me, the military is just about teamwork. It's about working with each other to accomplish a mission. And we work with each other better when we have better relationships, when we have better communication skills, when we're better able to manage ourselves and solve problems. So we work with our trainees by creating circumstances by which they hopefully figure that out by themselves. And then we issue corrective action to motivate them to figure that out by themselves when they're struggling with those kinds of things that help the team be successful.
Awesome. Now, in the reverse of that, when I meet someone who's been in the military and has had, long-standing service, I picture someone who's very regimented in their civilian life as well, like up really early, almost like an automaton who gets things done. They're very productive. That whole, we get more done before, whatever time than everyone else.
It's gotta be like 9 o'clock. We get up very early.
Yes.
That's true. Yeah.
Do you feel that your military service and experience helps you be productive in your regular life as well?
Yes. Yeah. I would say yes. There's a couple of things I think the military has helped me to do. First is create plans, right? And then create backup plans, and then create contingency plans, right? So the military is really big on planning. And so the military approach to creating plans has helped me to think about how I arrange big kind of projects. The second thing I think that's been really helpful is communication channels. Military cares a lot about how communication channels are constructed, because communication is what creates adaptability, right? If you can communicate in the battlefield, then you can adapt to the enemy, you can be successful. So for me, I think in my civilian career, I think a lot about how we set up communication channels, how people talk to each other, how information flows up and down a hierarchy, and how decisions get made. And then lastly, I think what the military does a really good job of is defining roles and defining how those roles play a part into the larger whole, right? So you could be a pencil sharpener, right? But I'm going to explain to you how your sharpened pencil helps him sign his name, which helps us, succeed in this far-off mission in this far-off land. So I think the military does a good job at really thinking about what kinds of roles that we need to have to be successful, and then making sure people understand how their small roles contribute to the larger whole. And I try to replicate that a little bit in the work that I do in urban assembly and other places.
Love it. Now I'm going to ask a question that I didn't plan to ask.
Shoot.
But since we're talking about military, I want your opinion.
Okay.
You know, we're living in a day and age where there's a lot of talk around the NFL.
Yeah.
And, you know, players kneeling and protest
Sure.
police brutality and the treatment of black and brown folks
Yeah.
in the States. And somehow that has morphed into this idea that you either got to support our troops and our military and, you know, support our flag and country or kneel. That those things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
What is your view on players who kneel as it relates to this idea that they're not supporting our troops or being patriots?
I don't think the two have anything to do with each other. I think within the military, there's certainly a high status placed on our flag. That's a symbol of our nation. When military members are killed, the flag is placed on a coffin, folded up, and given to the widow. That is a specific kind of context, which is in the military, right? And in America, if you're not in the military, you're not necessarily having to follow the rules of that context. Right. In America, you can do whatever you want with the flag. I do know that Colin Kaepernick, for example, refused to stand up at first, and it was his teammate who was a Special Forces veteran who talked to him about how that could be perceived and how kneeling was a sign of respect, but that could still get his message across. So it seems confusing to me that he would not. He would start standing up, start kneeling in order to show respect to those people who had deeply held values around the flag, and then was criticized for kneeling. So I think it's an opportunity to criticize people for bringing attention to police brutality, to the way that black men, brown men are profiled. And I think it's unfortunate. I think this is a country where our flag gives us the freedom to make the decisions that we want to make. And I think that Colin Kaepernick made an effort to show respect. And I think that in every other context, when you kneel for the Queen, when you kneel for prayer, kneeling is a sign of respect. And I think they've made this about, politics, when it could have been about how we do better with regards to how our police and our community are interacting. And I think we can do better.
Absolutely. So tell me, I want to know about a time when you had to be extraordinary on an ordinary day.
Okay, so I've been thinking about this, and I think about being extraordinary through the eyes of my kids. And what I do that's extraordinary for my kids is I help them just to be better people, right? So if I come home after some time away from the military and I bring them a toy, they're really into it, If I'm playing Halo or Injustice and I'm beating people, like my kids are really, really excited about that. And so I think about fatherhood as this extraordinary thing because it's like, I'm not as extraordinary as my kids think I am. But sometimes I think if I could be as extraordinary as they believe that I am, that I could be a better person every day. So I think for me, just like the extraordinary thing is trying to be a good father and working to live up to this kind of view or image that my kids have of me. And I think as I get older, and as they get older, that image is going to go away. But I hopefully I get a little bit closer to that, and they can be proud of the work that I've done, and feel a sense that they're kids to people who care about them, and they're prepared to do great things in this world.
Did your father play a similar role in your life? Do you feel like you idealized him as well?
Yeah, I do think, when you're a kid, everything that your dad does is really cool. So whether that was canoeing, he would teach us canoeing, he taught us how to change a tire, taught us basketball. My dad took us to karate. I think the extraordinary thing about being a father is about doing the best you can for your kids. And if you could imagine how your kids see you and then get half of that way, then you're doing everything you can to be a good guy. And I think when you're struggling, when I struggle, one of the things I think about is how would my kids see me? How will my kids feel about me? My dad told me when he was going to grad school, he went to grad school when he was older, I think in his 40s. He started struggling, and he thought to himself, I push my kids every day to do well in school. How would they see me if I don't push myself? Right. So like that's the extraordinary thing for me. You know, like we've done really long ruck marches in the army, um, and I think about like, man, how are my kids seeing me? You know, if I were to fail this, you know, they still think I was great. They come up with all sorts of excuses. Don't get me wrong, because when I'm losing in Halo, they're like, "Wow, that guy's cheating." You know, the controller's not working. Don't worry, Pop, you're still cool. Um, and sometimes in basic training with our young men, they want to quit. We call up their parents or their dad and say, hey, you know, don't tell me you want to quit. Tell him you want to quit. And what do you think about that? So the most extraordinary thing I feel like I've ever done is try to be a good dad and try and live up to my kids' expectations and hopefully put them out in the world that appreciates what they can offer.
That's great and honorable, especially within our community. But I do have a follow-up question.
Shoot.
What do you say to the student that comes to you? Says, Mr. Adams, I don't have a dad. I don't have anyone at home to help show me how to be a man, or I don't even know who my dad is. That's not your experience. You can't relate to me. What do you say to that young man?
I mean, we used to run a young men's group from one of our schools. And we used to ask them what manhood was, and people said responsibility, taking care of your business, having a job. How many people have had their father or have had a man in their life reflect that? And not enough people said they did. Not enough people said that they did. So to me, I think when kids come to me and they're struggling with that area, there's two things that I think about. One, I think about making sure that our gangs don't get them, because I think gangs try and recreate that experience for our kids, recreate that sense of purpose and identity and male kind of development with aggression versus responsibility, right? And they're trying to use our kids. They use our kids to do their bidding rather than lift them up. And the other thing I say is that, you know, you have responsibility to be the thing that you never had. Like, I'll be here, you know.
I like that.
There's a lot of people here who are willing to mentor. You know, obviously Brandon Frame is doing a great job with the Black Men Can.
Yes, absolutely.
There's mentor organizations within our schools. But we know what we're missing. You know, we know what it feels like to not have somebody teach you the kinds of things. And what are we doing so that that's not your kid's experience? What are you going to do to make sure that that's not the experience of your son? And we're replicating that same sense. I've had a lot of people give me excuses in that way and say, you know, well, I never knew that, never
Right.
felt it. And now it's my job to get that out there. There's a lot of people out here who are saying, I want to make that better. Like, I want to do better by that. If not my dad, then somebody else who cares about me. But I think it's surprising to me what people can do when they know that other people believe in them.
Right.
And the New York City Department of Education has a initiative called NYC Men Teach, which is focused on bringing men of color into the New York City Department of Education in terms of teaching. The importance of positive Black male images, I think, can't be overstated.
Absolutely.
You know, Brandon would say, I want our kids to have the same confidence in terms of being a lawyer, entrepreneur, an astronaut, as they say when I'm going to be a basketball player or a football player. And our kids, if you ask them, they'll be like, you know, I'm going to be a basketball player in the NBA, and if it doesn't work out, I might do the football thing. And if that doesn't work out, I'm going to be a Grammy-winning album, you know. And, you know, if that doesn't work out, you know, maybe, you know, I'll sell a couple million in terms of dancing,
Yes.
you know, MTV. And that's just because those are the role models they see. They know those stories. They know those profiles. And if we can do as good of a job at putting out other kinds of profiles for our kids and giving them confidence in that same way, confidence in terms of from women to men, that you can take care of a family, that you can get educated, that you can be successful, then I think our guys will be okay.
Awesome. So what's your dream for Urban Assembly? Where do you see this going? And because I think it's more than just a school, I think it's a movement and something that can expand beyond just this one educational system. So what's your dream? In a perfect world?
In a perfect world, I think people will come to our schools and see how we work with our kids and believe that poverty is not the most important thing that you need to understand about a student's destiny. I think they should come to our schools, see how teachers interact with kids, how kids interact with each other, and recognize the potential that's in our kids to be successful. I think the educational reform movement has focused a lot on test scores, and rightly so, in terms of being able to be successful in reading and writing. But I wish that when people come to our schools, they can see that all the reading and writing in the world is not going to help us if we can't make good decisions, if we can't solve problems, if we can't relate to each other effectively, if we can't form and maintain stable families. These are things that are going to allow social mobility in our community. These are the things that are going to allow us to be successful. And these are the things that are going to make it so that social mobility is not just taking one kid out of their neighborhood and moving them to the hills, right? It's about transforming the neighborhoods because of the way people treat each other and react to each other. So I know, and I'm recognizing all the things that are creating some of these circumstances, what we're up against, how we've gotten to this place. But I believe it's within ourselves to fix that. We can't look outside of ourselves to fix the things that people outside of ourselves have imposed, right? So it's within our own power to do something, and whatever's within our own power, I think we need to do.
Would you ever run for office?
Don't think so.
Because I feel like there's a platform that's coming together here, but okay.
Yeah, so, sure. No, I take that back. No, it depends on what office. I think I care about making a difference. I think, as I said, we can do better. There are some people out there, it's particularly in the current political sense, who don't think we can do better. All right, they see people screaming at each other, yelling at each other, calling each other names, and they say we can't do better. Or to see black people shooting each other in the streets and say, oh, we can't do better than that, right? Or we see homes that are led and they're broken down in terms of how people are relating, and they say we can't do better than that. And I don't believe that. I believe that somebody one day was in chains and looked up in the stars and said, if not me, then my son. If not my son, then their grandson. And if they had optimism, right, what's our excuse? Right? If they could believe with no government behind them, with people getting whipped and chained and killed, that there was something better than this, then why are we so wrapped around the axle around what the challenges that we face are? So
right, and I think there are parents who maybe in other communities or school systems who want better for their kids and say, I didn't have it. Maybe there was dysfunction within my family dynamic growing up, but I want better for my children. I'm not getting the support and ancillary resources that I need from their school, but I want to figure this out on my own. Can you direct those families somewhere when they don't have access to social emotional learning through their school system, or where they could start just to get educated and start to implement some of these teachings or ideas into their homes? Yeah,
sure. I think number one, people who make noise get responses, right? People who vote get responded to. Old people vote. That's why they never cut Social Security, right? So when parents care about something and they come to their school and they say, I care about this, and they go to the town board meeting and they say, I care about this, and the schools will respond. With regards to outside of there, there are a lot of places where kids can learn these skills. Sports is a really good example of that. The question is, can we be explicit about it, right? As opposed to saying, this is about winning, saying it's about learning how to resolve conflict, right? I think when we look at our church and our civics institutions, they're another place where people learn about how to get along and work with each other. And I think there's a lot of things like the YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, that are being more explicit now in terms of what their mission is. Instead of just saying youth development, they're saying, I want to produce a child who can solve problems. I want to produce a child who looks at decisions that he can make or she can make, and makes the one that's most in line with their goals and their values. I think if we can be a little bit more explicit in terms of our value systems and not be afraid of that, right? Like, what do we value? What do we care about? What are we willing to sacrifice for in our homes and our communities? Right? Then we're going to see people start to make decisions that are in line with those values, and then we're going to see people use that language and then have access to people who care about those kinds of things.
Absolutely. And whose story do you draw inspiration from?
I'm a big fan of John Lewis. I know it's kind of cliche, because John Lewis said, you've given us the law, I'm going to test it with myself. Right? So JFK had passed the interstate kind of bus travel law that said it must be desegregated, right? And then John Lewis just got on the bus and was like, well, let's do this thing. The law says I can do this. And they took him and they beat him, and and he got up and he did it again. And that wasn't for John Lewis, right? That was for you, and that was for me.
Right.
And he made them follow through with their ideals. He made them live the things that they said. And I take a lot of a sense of pride in that, you know, and inspiration. I feel like the John Lewises of the world are the people who force people to make the change, and not just talk about it, because the government said, yeah, that's true. But he got out and he put his whole body on the line to make that happen. So I like to think about myself, not having to get my skull cracked in, but pushing us to be better than we are today, and pushing us to reach the ideals that, you know, our community set, our church set, our country set.
And instilling that in the next generation as well.
It's about apathy, you know? I mean, it's not about right or wrong. It's about apathy. You know, Tupac would talk about hopelessness, this sense that I can't do better than what I'm at. And if we can convince people that we can do better. Doesn't have to be like this. They'll do better, and we'll do better. So I think if we could just kind of get every single person who doesn't feel like it matters, they matter, their story matters, and show them that there's a change to be had, and each person has a part to play in that change, then we'll continue to make this place a better place to be.
Do you think part of it, though, is, you know, we have a generation of people of color who are highly educated, prestigious jobs, making strides, and when they think about what it took for the generations behind us to implement change, having a fear that they're risking it all, reputation, job. You know, if you think about like the bus boycott.
Yeah.
We basically said as a people, no matter how long it takes,
right,
we are not riding the bus. We're going to carpool, we're going to walk, we're going to make it happen. If we got to leave for work 4 hours in advance to get there on time, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And there is a segment of the population who is operating like that right now, right? Working towards causes, making it happen, boots on the ground. But I think sometimes for the professionals, quote unquote, black folks, we think about the John Lewises of the world, getting thrown in the back of paddy wagons and cracked over the head, and then having a record as a result. We think about what we're risking by taking those steps. Do you think that's a valid concern, number one? And number two, do you think that people are just not thinking about the other ways in which you can implement change that don't involve standing on the front lines and getting arrested and hogtied and all that stuff?
I think we need to be tapped into something larger than ourselves. That's the only way, I think, to create purpose in life. These are the same conversations that I'm sure went through to people in terms of SNCC and SCLC and AAs. I mean, these are the same conversations I'm sure they had. And maybe they had less to lose because they were, you know, in the highest echelons of society, just in the black community. You know, but if it's good for them, good enough for them, it's good enough for me. You know, if it's good enough for a person to have to risk himself to help desegregate the South or to help integrate schools in the North, which is still a huge challenge. And then it's good enough for us to do the same. I think where I see is people are tired. I think people believed that, you know, the gains that were made and the sacrifices would kind of propel the momentum for like forever, you know? And like 50,000 years from now, people will still be talking about the March on Washington as a thing that helped our community maintain those gains, and there have to be people who are willing to do that every generation. Every generation, there has to be somebody willing to stand up and say, you know, I'm going to be that person. I'm going to make sure that our community lives the values that our country has said that it's about.
Awesome. So what's on the horizon for David Adams?
Well, I mean, we're working now on making sure that in New York City, we have a group called SEL for New York, making sure that every student in New York City and in New York State has an opportunity to learn social emotional skills. We're looking to advocate in terms of policy to make sure that these things get funded within school systems, to make sure that students have standards of learning about personal responsibility, learning about decision making, learning about social skills, the same way they learn about reading, math, and science. And we're looking to make sure that our parents and our communities have an opportunity to integrate these things into the work that they're doing with their kids at home. And I think you made that point before. Our parents work really hard in our communities. You know, many people are working 2 jobs. And they're not doing when they're struggling, it's not because they don't care. They're struggling because they're tired. They're struggling because they're burnt. So
Right.
what are the things that we can do for our parents to make it easier for our kids to learn and to develop, and to break the cycle so that the next generation can be a little bit more successful than the generation that we have.
Awesome. And where can people learn more about SEL for New York?
So if you contact me at dadams@urbanassembly.org, we will get you that information. Or you can go to our Urban Assembly website at urbanassembly.org, and then I can get you the information on that. There's also SEL for US.
So there's at a national level too.
There is a national level, yes. Now this is not coming out well, but yeah, there's like you go there and then you come to us and it's a whole thing.
Got it. So that's what Google is for, though. They
yes.
can look it up, SEL for US.
Yes.
And then drill down to SEL for New York.
Yes.
And can people find you on social media?
They can. I'm on LinkedIn and on Facebook, but I don't have a Twitter handle. I got to do better with that.
We had someone on for Twitter earlier, and she made sure to say people need to get on Twitter.
I know. People have said that to me, and I will do that.
I'm terrible
because
too.
I'm better than that. I'm better than that. And I gotta reach that ideal. But yeah, I'm always available in terms of those opportunities, and contacted through the Urban Assembly website. There's a national commission on social, emotional, and academic development. We'll be releasing our report in January with regards to our push to make sure that every kid across the country has an opportunity to learn these types of skills and competencies.
Awesome. And are there tactical ways that people can support the mission?
Absolutely. I think making sure that when you're meeting with your principal, when you're meeting with your superintendent, you're asking them what you're doing to develop the whole child. You're asking them what we're doing in terms of character development. What is the school's plans around social emotional development? Asking your teachers, what can they tell you about your child's social emotional development? When they say, he's reading well, his math is a little struggling, you say, that's great, that's really interesting. Tell me about how he's relating to other kids. Tell me how he's solving problems. Tell me how he's managing his emotions, right? How well is he calm down when faced with challenges? How well is he concentrate on tasks despite distractions? So I think every parent has an opportunity here to use this language, and when they use this language, schools are going to start to respond, and we're going to go from a thing that you could be doing to help your kid to a thing that we all must be doing to make sure kids are successful.
Well, I appreciate that, and I've appreciated this conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, I was very happy to be here.
Awesome. So to our audience, make sure, especially if you have children, do a little more research, learn a little bit more about social emotional learning. I feel like a lot of us could have used a little more of this growing up as well, both in school and at home. And check David out, follow the work that he's doing. I think he could possibly run for office one day. I don't care what he says. I think it's possible. In any event, and also remember to be extraordinary on an ordinary day. Take care.